I lay awake in bed there now, for God's sake, at night, in the middle of the night, thinking of the next paintings that I'm going to paint. I mean, that is bloody stupid. It really is. I mean, how much more time have I got? I need another 50 years to do the work that I would like to do. I just want to keep on working. And that's important. It is absolutely essential at 101 or 100 or whatever age you are to be making something, to be doing something. You must be able to stand back later and look at it. That thought came from a particular moment in my life, which I can identify to the second, to the minute. It was after the war ended in Bougainville, and we took over from the Americans, and the Americans had had a little radio station for their troops and our troops. But when they buzzed off, the radio station was taken over by the Australian Army, and they wanted a good announcer. So they must have let the word go around the units, I guess. I can't remember how I heard about it, I don't know, but I applied for the job. And so I found myself in a little hut in the middle of a clearing, speaking into a microphone. And until then, I'd always thought that being a radio announcer might be an interesting occupation. I decided it was the most boring thing I had ever done in my life, because you weren't talking to anybody. You weren't making anything. You weren't doing anything. You were talking into a microphone, actually, much as what I'm doing now. And I thought there was nobody in the room but I. So you weren't talking to anybody. You were talking to an amorphous crowd of God knows who they were outside there somewhere. And I remember when I finished one shift, I said to myself, if after the war, when I get out of the army, I am never going to do anything which doesn't give me, from which I can't see something that I've done. I will only do something that I can judge and make. And I remember thinking, if I only spend the rest of my life cutting grass, I'll be able to look back and say, that grass is well cut, or I could have done it a damn sight better. I think the thing that astonishes me looking back is the fact that one's life is frequently determined by the people you're lucky enough to meet. There was a young lieutenant in my unit who was interested in the arts, and I became friendly with him, and he'd just got married, and he was one of those young married people who thought that everybody ought to get married. And so he was passionately supportive of the idea of being married, and he invited me for dinner one night. His secretary was there. She was a lovely girl. I think I probably fell in love that night, and it took an awful long time to get around to getting married, but then I was in the army for a long time, and I couldn't have got married with the money that I earned in the army. I took her to places like the rainforest, and we camped in the rainforest and actually built a shed together. I've never nailed two bits of timber together in my life. It must have been a shock for a girl from the northwest of England coping with rainforest and leeches and all those other horrid things that happen. In 1950, I got married. Immediately after I finished the art school, after the war, I did 3 years at the art school, the National Art School in Sydney. And at the end of that 3-year period, we got married. I'd won a small prize, which gave me 50 guineas, I think, and I put it to a boat fare to London. I'm sure it didn't pay the whole boat fare, but anyway, it was a help. And so we hopped onto a boat, an Italian boat, Flotto Lauro, I think, and went to Naples, got off the boat at Naples, And then the two of us hitchhiked from Naples to London. And that was a revelation. I'd never been outside, I'd never been outside Sydney. I'd been to Newcastle and maybe Melbourne. Big deal, but I hadn't been anywhere else. I had never seen great artworks, and I found to my astonishment that one could wander through little small towns, small villages in Italy, and go to the local church. And on the wall of that local church, you'd find a major piece of artwork, a 15th century artwork. And this was a total revelation that people could have been living with things like that. There was nothing like that in Goulburn. But hitchhiking for a girl from a conservative family from the northwest of England was surely not the thing that she had expected when she married some bloke. I think I must have led her astray. Well, God bless her. Anyway, we were married for, must have been well over 60 years, 50 till 2011. 61 years. And she put up with me that long. And why the devil she did that, I can't imagine. She could have married a banker or a broker or something who would have had a stable job and made a lot of money. I cannot understand how the girl was so foolish, loving, and confident. I think we're all extraordinarily lucky to have people like that with us. But I think she was an artist in her own right, and I think that's what kept us together. She worked in ceramics for many, many years and was a very good potter. And she was always irritable by the fact that paintings were seen as fine art and pots were seen as decorative arts, I think they called it, and that infuriated her. So she did an enormous amount of research all over the world, I mean that, all over the world, making the point that a lot of the images that we become used to in the so-called fine arts, in fact, had their origins in pieces which were made by craftspeople, not so-called artists. I stayed in London for 8 years. I made frames for a while with a few other artists. One of the other artists there was an Australian called Fred Williams, whom you would know. And Fred and I did something in the frame making process. Can't remember what it was. I don't think I did much. But I couldn't stand it. I was just working in a basement and I didn't go to London to work in a basement. Fred stayed on and I left after a few months. And Fred gave me good advice, which I didn't take. Fred said, don't stay away too long. And I think I did stay away too long. I stayed there with my wife and we had kids. That's my daughter playing with a Henry Moore. No, wasn't interested in art. She was picking flowers at the foot of one of the master's pieces. I had a good job in London as art director of a magazine. Well paid, interesting job. Oh, that's me in London in the 50s. Good God. And I walked into the editor's office one day and said, I'm resigning. And she said, you can't do that, you can't do that. She said, you've got to speak to the executive editor and tell him. I didn't even know we had an executive editor. So she wheeled me into the executive editor and he said, oh, you can't do that. He said, we've had our eyes on you. We think you're, executive material He said, I want you to go away, don't talk about it for a while, go away and come back in a fortnight's time and see if you still feel the same. Tell me then. So I went home. I didn't think about it for a minute. I walked back in a fortnight's time and I said, sorry, I'm resigning. You've got to do it if you've got to do it. Bugger them all. There's no alternative. The same thing happened when we came back from London. We were broke because I hadn't earned any money for 18 months. And I got a job in an advertising agency and I worked there for a while. Until I literally one day I felt that I was in a huge trench. I remember feeling I'm in a trench. I can see the sides of this trench. The trench is getting deeper and deeper and deeper. I'll never get out. I couldn't climb out. So I did the same thing again, and I resigned. Look, I don't know. I haven't got the answer. I just want more time, though. Those are some of my early paintings. There's another one over there. People sometimes think that technical virtuosity is important, and yes, of course it is, but it is not the end. There has to be something more than that. What that other thing is, of course, is what we all strive for. It's what musos strive for. It's what jazz people strive for. I come in here every morning and sit on my chair there in the sun and listen to Dave Brubeck. I don't know if you like jazz, but I mean, I don't know how these guys do it, really. You know, from the most banal little 3 or 4 note unit, they take off and it becomes something miraculous. I just don't know how they do it. I frequently use images as metaphors, and I use the tree fern, which I turn into a female figure occasionally, because it suits my purpose about being part of the landscape. And I happen to think they're very beautiful, and a nutty idea. I rather like the way they throw their fronds in the air and that look like throwing their hair in the air. So it's about belonging to the land, I guess. One always knows there is a better way of doing it, but this must apply to a doctor, to a dentist, to an architect. There is always a better way, a different way, which one hopes will be better. And it probably would be better. If you draw what you see and feel and experience, then it puts you in touch with the world. It gives you a sense of your place in the world, in the country, in the bush, in the world. I won the Archibald once, and that is blown out of all proportion to its importance. It's only a portrait prize, for God's sake. It's not most paintings, one hopes, have those other elements that I talked about. Portraiture, most portraiture, not all, but most portraiture requires a degree of excellence in technical excellence. And everyone expects it to look like the person. Look at some of the paintings that Picasso did in the 20s, and you wouldn't recognize the person who might have been the other side of the canvas. And he allowed his imagination full rein. Well, most portraits most portrait prizes, and certainly the Archibald rarely does that. I won it with what I thought was a good painting, and it looked very like the bloke, and it had other elements which I added to it, which I thought were significant at the time, and said something beyond the sheer likeness. It said something about the subject. The subject was a good friend of mine. I suppose I might as well tell the story. We were having dinner at a friend of his place one night, and some woman around the dinner table said, "Have either of you guys ever gone in for the Archibald?" And we both said, "No, nobody takes that seriously. No, I'm not going to. No, we don't do that." My friend Bert probably might have had a glass of red more than I did. I don't know. And he leant across the table and said, "Okay, why don't we? I'll challenge you. You paint me and I'll paint you." So we went ahead with that a fortnight or so later. And I'd been in my particular bit of rainforest down the south coast. There's a big escarpment above me, and hang gliders had been leaping off the escarpment. And I thought that was dangerous. They might have ended up in a giant stinging tree in the forest. Anyway, the council stopped them eventually. But there were a lot of birds around there, so I started drawing birds, and I started drawing people leaping off cliffs. And then they were flying creatures. And then, inevitably, of course, one thinks of other flying creatures, and you realize that this is an image that humanity has used for centuries. Every culture has had flying creatures, flying images in it. Angels, obviously, for a start. The Christian culture has angels. There's the Greek image of Icarus, and that's a lovely story. And Icarus is about escape. It's about reaching beyond yourself. It's about taking a chance. Now, the fellow I was painting, Bert Flugelman, I always thought was a risk taker. He frequently did odd and sometimes foolish things like we all do, but he took risks. He was a sculptor. So I wanted some image, some reference to that. So I thought I would draw my Icarus-type figures behind, but in the portrait, I'd paint them in behind Bert, so that not only was it a good likeness of him, but it looked as though the wings belonged to him. And it wasn't until I'd actually done it, I'd actually painted them in, that it occurred to me, and I don't speak German, so how it occurred to me, I don't know, that Bert's name, which was Flugelman, was German for wingman. Flugel is wing, man is man. So Bert's actual name is Wingman. And I'd had called this little creature Wingman for want of a better name. So it refers to Bert, it refers to Icarus, it refers to all of us who are looking for an escape and who are hoping to reach the sun. Oscar Wilde said something once. One of the many intelligent things he said, never, if I can remember it, never regret thy fall, O Icarus of the fearsome flight, for the greatest tragedy of them all is never to have felt the burning light. And that's what we're all searching for, the burning light. He said a lot of sensible things. He also said the greatest tragedy of old age is that we are forever young. I've been lucky. I've been lucky. Maybe that's the essential thing. Maybe it is sheer bloody luck.